the wind arrived long before the storm. It swept down from the towering Rocky Mountains with a lonely howl, driving curtains of snow across the frozen trails until the world became little more than white sky and white earth. Pine trees bowed beneath heavy blankets of ice, their branches groaning like old men burdened by too many winters. Every breath froze before it could drift away, and every step through the deep snow reminded travelers that nature ruled these mountains, not men. Silas Mercer leaned forward in his saddle, his weathered buckskin coat dusted white, his thick wool scarf pulled high over his beard. At 38, he looked as though the mountains themselves had carved him from pine and stone. Broad-shouldered, quiet, and strong, he had spent nearly half his life living alone in a small log cabin hidden deep among the snowy ridges. The wilderness had taught him patience, honesty, and one simple rule: if someone was in danger, you helped them. No questions. No bargains. For 8 long weeks he had trapped beaver, foxes, and martens through blizzards and frozen rivers. His hands were cracked from the cold, and every muscle in his body ached from hauling heavy pelts across miles of mountain trails. Yet he complained to no one. The silence of the wilderness had become his oldest companion. By late afternoon he finally reached Frost Creek, a tiny frontier settlement tucked between snow-covered hills. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys while horses stood wrapped in frost outside the general store. It was the last place to buy supplies before the mountain passes disappeared beneath winter for months. Inside the trading post, warmth and the smell of coffee greeted him. Hunters, miners, and ranchers crowded around the iron stove, shaking snow from their hats while talking about wolves, avalanches, and the coming storm. Silas quietly laid his bundles of winter furs upon the counter. Old Mr. Dawson, the trader, inspected each pelt carefully before counting out a small stack of silver coins. "Good season," Dawson said. "Best fox pelts I've seen all winter." Silas nodded. Without hesitation he pushed nearly every coin back across the counter. "Settling my debt," he said. The trader counted the money, smiled faintly, and tucked it into his ledger. When everything was finished, only a single silver dollar remained lying on the counter. Silas picked it up slowly. His last dollar. He turned the coin over in his fingers. 1 sack of flour. A little coffee. Some lamp oil. If he stretched everything carefully, he might survive until spring. He slipped the coin into his pocket. Outside, the wind had grown even fiercer. As he reached for his horse's reins, loud shouting echoed from the center of town. A crowd had gathered beside an old freight wagon. Curiosity wasn't a habit Silas usually entertained, but something about the voices sounded wrong. They weren't excited. They were amused. He walked closer. 3 rough-looking men stood beside the wagon, bundled in long coats stained with mud and whiskey. Each carried a revolver on his hip. Their horses looked exhausted after days of hard riding. Inside the wagon stood a young woman wrapped in a heavy gray hooded cloak. Her head remained lowered. Snow clung to the edges of her cloak, and her boots were so worn that one toe poked through cracked leather. Rope still circled her wrists, leaving angry red marks against pale skin. One of the men grabbed her shoulder roughly. "There she is," he shouted. "Caught this little thief wandering the mountains." The townspeople murmured. An elderly woman frowned. "A thief? That's what she wants you to think," another man laughed. "She's brought nothing but trouble from the mining camps." The hooded woman said nothing. Not a single word. She simply stared at the frozen ground. A drunken miner staggered forward, laughing loudly. "What are you feeding her for?" he slurred. "She's not worth the trouble." Another man smirked. "Truth is, we're tired of dragging her around." He looked over the crowd. $1 silver. Several people laughed. "For $1, the man continued, she's yours." More laughter followed. Someone joked she wouldn't survive the night anyway. Someone else suggested leaving her for the wolves. Silas watched quietly. His eyes never left the bruises around the woman's wrists. Those weren't made by ordinary rope. They were fresh. Whoever had tied her had done so tightly. The leader shoved the woman forward. "Anybody?" No one moved. The silence stretched. Snow drifted between them. The woman never begged. Never cried. Never pleaded. She simply stood there, shoulders trembling from exhaustion. Silas reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the single silver dollar. He knew exactly what it meant. Without it, there would be no flour. No coffee. No lamp oil. Winter in the mountains was already unforgiving. Living through it without supplies bordered on impossible. He looked once toward the general store. Then back at the woman. Without another thought, he stepped forward. "I'll take her." The crowd turned. The leader grinned greedily. I knew somebody would. Silas placed the silver dollar into the man's hand. The coin disappeared into the outlaw's pocket almost instantly. Several men chuckled. Never figured Mercer needed a servant. Guess living alone gets lonely. Silas ignored every word. Instead, he pulled the hunting knife from his belt. The bounty hunters instinctively reached for their revolvers. But Silas merely cut the ropes around the woman's wrists. The frayed cords fell into the snow. Then he stepped back. His voice remained calm. You aren't mine. The woman slowly looked up. You paid for me, she whispered. I paid for your freedom. The entire street fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. The bounty hunters stared in disbelief. What are you doing? One demanded. Silas met his eyes without fear. I bought the right to decide. He turned back to the young woman. You can go wherever you want. For several long moments, she didn't move. It was as though she couldn't understand what freedom felt like. Slowly, trembling, she reached up and pulled back her hood. The crowd gasped. She was young, perhaps 25, with striking blue-gray eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. A bruise darkened one cheek, and strands of chestnut hair escaped beneath the hood, stiff with ice. Though exhausted and painfully thin, there was unmistakable dignity in her face. She wasn't the face of a criminal. She looked like someone who had been running for a very long time. Silas noticed fear more than anything else. Not fear of him. Fear of someone still coming. He gently offered his heavy wool blanket. You'll freeze. She accepted it with shaking hands. Their eyes met for the first time. Her lips trembled. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than the falling snow. If they discover where I am. She swallowed hard, tears freezing against her cheeks. They'll kill everyone who helps me. Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. Those weren't the words of a thief. Those were the words of someone carrying a secret worth murdering for. Before he could ask another question, the three men exchanged uneasy glances. One quietly mounted his horse. Another looked toward the distant mountain road. Almost as if they expected someone else to arrive. Silas noticed. So did the woman. Without another word, he helped her onto his horse and climbed into the saddle behind her. The first deep howl of wolves echoed across the valley. As the blizzard swallowed the road leading into the mountains, neither of them noticed three unfamiliar riders emerging through the curtain of snow on the eastern ridge. One rider lifted a spyglass toward the departing horse. Then, with icy certainty, he spoke the words that would change both their lives forever. There she is. The hunt had only just begun. The blizzard erased their tracks before midnight. Silas guided his horse through narrow pine trails that only seasoned mountain men knew existed. Snow fell so heavily that the world disappeared beyond a few yards, leaving only the soft crunch of hooves and the whistle of icy wind through the evergreens. Hours later, a faint orange glow appeared between the trees. His cabin. Built against a granite cliff decades earlier by his father, the small log cabin had survived countless winters. Thick pine logs, a sturdy stone chimney, and a roof buried beneath snow made it almost invisible from a distance. It was exactly why Silas trusted it. He helped the exhausted woman from the horse. She nearly collapsed. Without a word, Silas lifted her into his arms and carried her inside. Warmth greeted them. A fire still crackled in the massive stone fireplace where he had left embers burning before traveling to Frost Creek. He wrapped fresh logs onto the flames while the woman stood silently near the door, as though uncertain she deserved to step farther inside. You'll freeze standing there, Silas said gently. She hesitated. Then slowly crossed the room. Silas poured steaming coffee into a tin mug and placed it beside a bowl of hot venison stew he had left simmering before leaving. She stared at the food. Not eating. Just staring. When did you last eat? He asked. Her voice was barely audible. I don't remember. Silas quietly pushed the bowl closer. She took one cautious bite. Then another. Within moments she was eating as though afraid someone might snatch it away. Silas pretended not to notice. Instead, he busied himself drying blankets near the fire. When she finally finished, tears filled her eyes. No one shared their supper with me in weeks. Silas simply nodded. Everybody deserves supper. Nothing more. No questions. No demands. That simple kindness unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. After a long silence she finally spoke. My name is Evelyn. Silas. Another silence settled between them. Outside, wolves howled somewhere deep in the forest. Inside, only the crackling fire broke the quiet. For the first time in many days, Evelyn removed her heavy cloak. Silas immediately noticed she wore clothes far too fine for an ordinary traveler. Though torn and stained, the fabric had once been expensive. Around her neck hung a thin silver chain with a tiny brass key attached. She instinctively tucked it back beneath her collar. Silas looked away. Whatever secret she carried belonged to her until she chose otherwise. Over the following days, winter trapped them inside the mountains. The blizzard refused to end. Together they settled into an unexpected routine. Each morning Silas chopped firewood while Evelyn baked bread from the last of the flour. She repaired torn blankets, swept the cabin, and quietly hummed old frontier hymns while stirring stew over the cast-iron stove. For the first time in years, the lonely cabin sounded alive. Yet Silas noticed something strange. Whenever horses could be heard in the distance, or even the snapping of frozen branches, Evelyn immediately stopped whatever she was doing. She listened, watched the windows, counted the sounds, always expecting someone. One evening, Silas found her standing outside despite the freezing wind. She was staring toward the southern mountain pass. "They'll come from there," she whispered. "You know who's hunting you." She nodded. "But I wish I didn't." Silas waited. Eventually she took a deep breath. "My father wasn't a thief. I never thought he was. He kept records." Silas frowned. "Records?" "He worked as chief accountant for Black Ridge Silver Company." The name immediately caught Silas's attention. Everyone in the Rockies knew Black Ridge Mine. It was the richest silver operation west of Denver. Its owner, Victor Kane, was admired as one of the wealthiest businessmen in the territory. "My father discovered something," Evelyn continued. "The company wasn't losing miners to accidents." She looked directly into Silas's eyes. They were murdering them. Silas remained silent. "My father found hidden payroll books. They were stealing miners' wages, claiming men died in cave-ins that never happened. Those who discovered the truth simply disappeared." The fire popped loudly behind them. "My father copied everything." She reached beneath the lining of her cloak and carefully removed a small weathered leather journal wrapped in oilcloth. "I've carried this for 3 months." Silas opened it carefully. Inside were names, dates, payments, maps, detailed records of secret graves, bribes, murder orders, signed receipts. Enough evidence to destroy one of the most powerful men in the frontier. Silas slowly closed the journal. "So that's why they're hunting you." She nodded. "My father died protecting it." She swallowed painfully. "He told me to reach the federal marshal in Helena. But they found you first. They've been following me across 3 territories." Silas stared into the fire. This wasn't simply about saving one frightened woman anymore. This journal could expose years of murder. Outside, snow continued falling. Far below the mountain, another group of riders entered Frost Creek. Their horses wore government saddles. Their coats carried federal badges. The townspeople welcomed them immediately. The leader smiled politely. "We're searching for a dangerous fugitive." The sheriff frowned. What did she do? The stranger removed a folded poster bearing Evelyn's sketch. Murder. It was a lie. Yet no one there knew it. Within hours every cabin in Frost Creek was being searched. Meanwhile, Silas quietly prepared for something he hoped would never happen. He checked every rifle, sharpened every hunting knife, reset old wolf traps along hidden trails, covered narrow paths with fresh snow, marked safe routes only he understood. The mountain had protected him his entire life. Now it would protect Evelyn too. 3 nights later, just before dawn, the dogs outside began barking wildly. Silas was already awake. He extinguished every lantern. Evelyn looked toward the window. Dark figures moved silently between the trees. Not 1. Not 2. Nearly a dozen riders. They had found the cabin. A voice echoed through the forest. "Silas Mercer." The mountain man quietly loaded his rifle. "Come outside." Silas looked toward Evelyn. "There isn't a back door." "I know." She clutched the journal tightly. "They'll kill you because of me." Silas gave the faintest smile. "No." He handed her a pair of snowshoes. "They'll regret climbing my mountain." The first rifle shot shattered the cabin window. The hunt had finally reached his doorstep. The first rifle shot splintered the cabin window. Glass scattered across the wooden floor as freezing wind rushed inside. Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed his long rifle, slung a leather satchel over his shoulder, and handed Evelyn a thick fur coat. "Stay behind me." Another shot slammed into the cabin wall. The voices outside grew louder. "Mercer," a man shouted. "Hand over the girl and you walk away alive." Silas answered by kicking open the back door. Snow exploded into the room. "Run." Together they disappeared into the white wilderness just as 3 armed men burst through the cabin's front entrance. The chase had begun. Only one man on either side truly understood the mountain. Silas. He led Evelyn across narrow ridges hidden beneath drifting snow, through frozen pine groves, and over streams buried beneath thick sheets of ice. Their snowshoes glided across the surface while the heavier riders struggled to follow. Behind them, Victor Kane's hired killers spread through the forest. The mountain echoed with barking orders. "There. They went north. Don't lose them." Silas smiled slightly. "They're exactly where I want them." He stopped beside a steep hillside blanketed with untouched snow. Quietly he drew his hunting knife and sliced through several thick ropes hidden beneath the drift. The ropes had held back a massive shelf of packed snow for years. He grabbed Evelyn's hand. "Run." They had barely crossed the ridge when a thunderous crack split the mountain. The entire hillside collapsed. An enormous avalanche roared downward with terrifying force, swallowing pine trees, horses, and armed riders beneath thousands of tons of snow. The mountain itself had turned against the hunters. Several survived. Many did not. Victor Kane escaped with only 2 men. His expensive coat was torn, his face bleeding, but rage burned brighter than fear. He knew Evelyn still carried the journal. And without it, his empire would fall. Silas and Evelyn reached an abandoned mining settlement by sunset. Broken buildings leaned beneath heavy snow. Rusting equipment stood frozen where miners had left it years before. "This is Black Ridge," Evelyn whispered. "My father worked here." Silas studied the silent mine entrance. It was unstable. Dangerous. Perfect. "If Kane wants the journal," Silas said quietly, "he'll come here." They didn't wait long. As darkness settled over the valley, Victor Kane emerged from the blowing snow with his remaining gunmen. He smiled coldly. "I've crossed 3 territories for that journal." His revolver pointed directly at Evelyn. "Give it to me." She stepped forward. "No. You'd rather die?" "I'd rather the truth live." Victor laughed. "The truth belongs to whoever survives." Before he could fire, another voice echoed across the abandoned camp. "Drop the gun." Sheriff Amos Walker stood beside nearly 20 miners and townspeople from Frost Creek. Word had spread after Kane's men falsely searched every home. The townspeople had begun asking questions. One honest deputy had discovered that Kane's federal badges were counterfeit. Now the entire town had come. Not to protect a wealthy mine owner. To protect the truth. Victor looked around. For the first time, uncertainty entered his eyes. He fired wildly. Gunfire erupted across the abandoned mine. Silas tackled Evelyn behind a pile of timber while bullets shattered old beams overhead. One of Kane's own gunmen lowered his rifle. "I didn't sign up to murder innocent folks." Another threw down his weapon. "So did I." Victor suddenly stood alone. Realizing defeat, he ran toward the deepest tunnel of the abandoned mine. Silas followed. Inside, rotten support beams groaned beneath decades of neglect. Victor reached a narrow ledge overlooking an abandoned silver shaft. He turned, revolver shaking. "This mine made me rich." Silas slowly approached. It buried honest men. Victor pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. His final bullet had already been fired. He stumbled backward. The rotten wooden platform beneath him cracked loudly. For one brief moment he tried grabbing the edge. Then the entire platform collapsed. Victor Kane disappeared into the darkness below as the abandoned mine echoed with a deafening crash. Silence followed. The sheriff carefully recovered the leather journal. 4 weeks afterward, every page was examined. Every name. Every payment. Every murder. Hidden graves were uncovered beneath the snow. Families finally learned what had happened to husbands, fathers, and sons who had vanished years before. Black Ridge Silver Company was seized by federal authorities. Its stolen money was returned to surviving miners and their widows. Justice, though late, finally arrived. Winter slowly surrendered to spring. Snow melted from the pine branches. Mountain streams flowed once again through the valleys. Wildflowers pushed through patches of lingering snow outside Silas's cabin. Evelyn remained. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Because she had finally found somewhere she belonged. Together they repaired fences, planted a small garden, and rebuilt the cabin porch that winter storms had nearly destroyed. One quiet evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold, Evelyn stood beside Silas overlooking the valley. She reached into her pocket. Inside lay a single silver dollar. The very coin the sheriff had recovered from one of the captured bounty hunters after Victor Kane's arrest. She gently placed it into Silas's hand. "You gave away everything you had for someone you didn't even know." Silas smiled softly. It seemed like the right thing. She closed his fingers around the coin. "No." She shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "It was the moment that gave me my life back." A few months later, the people of Frost Creek gathered beneath towering pine trees beside the little frontier church. The same townspeople who had once watched a frightened hooded woman stand in the snow now watched her walk toward Silas wearing a simple ivory dress sewn by the women of the valley. No expensive jewels. No grand celebration. Only honest smiles, mountain wildflowers, and neighbors who had learned that courage often begins with a single act of kindness. When the ceremony ended, the old sheriff quietly slipped the silver dollar into a small wooden frame. It remained hanging above the fireplace in Silas and Evelyn's cabin for the rest of their lives. Whenever visitors asked why an ordinary coin held such an honored place, Silas never spoke of avalanches, gunfights, or murder. He simply smiled toward Evelyn and answered with the same quiet humility that had always defined him. "Sometimes," he said, "the greatest fortune a man can spend is his very last dollar."